everybody, I'm back again. I'm not going to show you how to do a craft this time. I'm going to introduce you to someone that I think you're going to enjoy hearing about. This gentleman goes to the First Church in Ludlow, and he is teaching a group of adults. And what he is teaching is something that everybody, I think, needs to know eventually. He is a genealogist, and he's very knowledgeable. His name is Dave Robison, and he has his own genealogy establishment. I guess you'd call it an establishment.
Yes, you would.
And he's going to tell us a little bit about how he operates, and also he's going to tell us when he started, how long ago, and how much he enjoys doing it, and if he's happy doing it. And also, he'll tell you probably how he gets some of his information. Dave, I'm glad to have you with us.
Well, Mrs. Buttercup, I'm glad to be here with you. It's a delight. It's very nice.
It's fun to have people come in and learn to know that there are people out there that can help other people.
And that's a part of this whole business that I enjoy. After dealing with my own family research for the past 15 or so years, people began to reach out to me and ask me if they could help them with this, that, or the other issue. And by and large, it's been an enjoyable experience for me. So we enjoy it.
I know because the group that you're having meet at the church, it's working out so that a lot of us who have not had any knowledge of our families are learning things. Like me, I was 14 months when my mother died, so I didn't know her family. And I'm gradually getting to know who was there and who's still there.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this is a good time to get involved in this field because there are so many records that are available online. That's the upside. The downside is that many of it is subscription only, so you have to pay. You have to pay to get subscriptions to these websites. But for the most part, I started off with just paper, and if I could get into that a little bit, I got a letter from a cousin that I had never met from Alabama. Sent me a paper that described 3 or 4 generations of my father's side of the family, and I was just amazed that I could actually read the names of people that had preceded me. My third great-grandfather, who was born in 1849. My God, 1849. And I just put that paper away and never bothered with it till around 1998. I took it out, and that's when everything kind of began.
Well, I know that there's all kinds of forms that we can find to fill out. There are a lot of places that we can go. I know we talked a lot about the census, and that is very, very interesting to see how censuses are set up. Now, I don't know if you can see on up there or not. Can you see, can that be shown? I don't know if you can see it or not, but this shows that this is the names of the people, and this is in 1920. So you see, and you go down and look to see where the name is, and then it goes across and it tells husband, wife, and then it tells children. And it's very, very interesting to go into these census records to find out these different things.
Indeed it is. The United States began taking census records in 1790, but from 1790 to 1840, they only listed the head of household. And then they listed the numbers of people in that household without names, without occupations, without where they came from. And it just said, for example, Isaac Bassett. And it would say there's 1 person under 14, there's 3 people between 15 and 20, et cetera, et cetera. Then and that continued through until 1850. Then in 1850, they began to list everyone in the household. So it would have the name of the head of household and then everyone else in the household with their relationship to that head of household. So the information beginning in 1850 was much more detailed.
All right, now on my list I've got here is why did you start this?
Well, what you don't know won't hurt you.
Oh, is that?
Yeah, that's what
I guess you got a point there.
That's what my parents would both tell me if I asked questions, and there's some very long and elaborate reasons why each of them chose not to discuss certain issues. But most of the things that they had, either they didn't know it to answer the questions, or they just didn't think it was really important. But I've since been able to research and meet cousins. The most exciting thing for me was to send a letter to Evergreen, Alabama, asking if they could help me with, if I track down some members of my family. I got a letter back saying, you should write a letter to Mrs. Sarah Coker. And I did. I wrote a letter to this woman named Sarah Coker, asking her if she knew anybody in my family, and she sent me back a letter and said, oh, nice to meet you, nephew.
Nephew.
Turns out she was my my grand aunt,
Oh, wow.
and she was my grandfather's youngest sister. I never met her in my life. Well, I ultimately took a trip to Alabama to meet with her. Nicest old lady. She had mountains of information. She'd been doing genealogical research on our family for decades, and she had piles and piles of things which she shared with me and gave me a lot of it. And she had pictures of my sister and I through grade school that my father had sent to her. And it was a little spooky to see the pictures that she had with the letters, and I didn't know this woman from Adam's house cat,
Well, you
which is
were
one of her
very
expressions.
fortunate because you had family that you could contact.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I was trying to find a place, nobody knew my mother.
Yes.
She came from Ireland.
Yeah.
She was over here as what they call an indentured servant.
Yes.
And therefore, nobody knew her background.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I dug and dug and dug, and I did find something. It's not complete because I've shown you some of my papers, and I'm not complete on any of them.
It's never complete.
It's never complete.
We always find more and more and more, and it leads us off
Okay.
in this direction, that
And of
direction.
course, you said you can go on the computer.
Sure.
It's very well to say that, but if you have a laptop that works, it's great. But when you have a laptop that swears at you every time you use it, it's no fun.
It's not a well-trained laptop, I understand, yeah.
So now, what do you tell people to do? Now, I know a few things, but maybe you'd like to tell them.
Well, the very first thing that you need to do is to write what you know.
What you know.
And get it down on a piece of paper, and that's what a pedigree chart is for, is you start with yourself. Obviously you know who you are, and then you write down your father's name and then your mother's name. Then you go to the next generation, your father's father and your father's mother, and then your mother's father and your mother's mother. So now you've got 2 generations, and that's perfect. That is, this is the starting person here, and then there's the father and the mother, and then the grandfather and grandmother, paternal grandparents and maternal and then it goes on from there.
Yeah.
And when I say I went on from there, and you mentioned the thousands of people in my database, there are nearly 38,000 people in my database to whom I'm related, but obviously it goes back so many generations. Hardly, it's just the current generations that are still alive, obviously. But I'm lucky in another respect. Not only did my great aunt do a lot of work ahead of me on my southern relatives, but most of my maternal side is all in New England. And the people in Massachusetts, beginning with the Puritans, were manic about keeping records. And there are records and records and records that you can either access them online, or you can actually go to the towns and look at the vital records, birth, marriage, and death records, and so forth.
Well, I know that lots of things that I found out was by chance. And we actually went to Ireland, and I found out where my mother lived. The church there was excellent. They gave me the list of all her family and the baptismal dates and all. And it just seems that if you can get into something like that, all right, when she died, she was buried in New York. I wrote to the cemetery. They sent me a list of the people that were buried in that grave site where she was. And there was about 8 or 10 names. And so here we are, we're finding out more and more. There are more people that you don't know about. And of course, if in your case, you had a few people living that could tell you.
Right.
But most of mine are gone, and since I come from Connecticut, and there's no one up here in this area, I had a little bit more trouble finding people I knew.
Let me say this about graveyards. It's an excellent source of information, and you did the right thing by writing the letter. And fortunately, you had cooperative people who sent back information. That isn't always the case. However, I will say that most people who attend the offices and cemeteries are very cooperative. Prior to doing that, in this day and age at least, there is a website called Find a Grave, findagrave.com. And there are thousands of volunteers around the country that are putting that information up on the internet. So very often you can get lucky. And as time goes by, there are more and more and more records. When I first volunteered for Find a Grave, there was just a little over 3 million records. But today there's over 83 million records at Find a
Well,
Grave.
I was fortunate, yes, because the thing was, this plot of land was bought, a big one, and they were all in that one section of the cemetery. So there's no trying to find out which part of everything was.
Right.
And so it worked out very good.
That is lucky. I'll say one thing about Irish immigrants. Very often when they're buried, the family put from County Tipperary or from County Kerry on the tombstone, so that, because it's sometimes very difficult to do research on the internet for Irish records, because they were, literally everything was burned in 1922. So a lot of the stuff is gone. But if you're trying to track down an Irish relative, if you're lucky enough to find a tombstone that has the county of origin, that narrows it down tremendously to help you in doing your research.
Well, I know that people out all around, I might say something about, I'm going to genealogy classes. They say, oh, where? And so that it's great to hear. When we had a meeting the other night, it was very interesting to hear the different people of what they had to say or what they were asking. And the questions were very, very explicit, so that they had to, they knew that their parent was there, but where and how and why.
Yeah, and let me say this about researching your family, if I can interrupt. Some people are very adamant that my name is spelled such and such a way, and that's the way my name is spelled. And if it's spelled any other way, it's somebody else. That is a huge mistake, huge mistake. My case is a perfect example. My last name is spelled Robison, and I was arrogant about that. If anybody, when I was a kid, tried to say Robinson, I'd say, no, it's Robison. Well, my last name, going back generations, is Robison, Robertson, Robertson, Robinson, you name it, that's how they spelled it, because they spelled it the way it sounded.
Well, it's just like my name.
That's right. Yep.
Brooks. I was Lillian Brooks until I was in third grade. And in third grade, my father had to change all his papers to the correct name, so I became Lillian Bach.
And then you became Mrs. Buttercup.
But it's strange how the names of people are changed, so that if anyone out there is looking for a name, they've got to be sure that they know my mother's name was Cannon, C-A-N-O-N. It comes through on the papers, C-A-N-N-E-N. We see C-A-N-A-N, O-N, U-N. I mean, you just
keep an open mind.
That's right.
Is my only point. And if you keep an open mind on well, maybe that is my cousin, or maybe that is my second great grandfather. Then you look for other information surrounding that person, who their siblings and children were. And sometimes, if you can be a little bit of a detective, you'll find out that you may indeed have the right person.
Well, I know that in my case, it's been kind of rough for me.
Translations can be difficult as well. Is it Poirier, or French names being translated to English? Dubois can be woods.
Yeah.
They may have been Dubois in Canada, and they came
Bach
down and called
is English derivation.
Yeah.
And the thing that gets me is I looked in Patrick Cannon, who was my father's, my mother's father's name, and I showed you the list. I think I had about 5 pages of Patrick Cannons. So you have to know a little more about what you're looking for.
Right.
And I happen to know who he was married to, so I was able to. But that's another thing that we've got to. If you're looking for something, you've got to get that information on hand so that you can search that way.
Let me say this about when you're talking to living relatives. I used a digital tape recorder to interview some of my relatives who have since passed away. So I'm glad I have the recordings. And Sarah down in Alabama, for example. But I just interviewed these folks, ask them, I would sit with them and say, well, do you mind if I record this? Most recently we did this with a cousin of mine in Palmer, who I just found. Here she lives right in Palmer, and I just found her a few months ago. But and she was glad to find me, I was glad to find her, and we each had many comparable documents and photos, etc. It's another big story, but just sit down with a tape recorder, because you forget that it's there after a while, and it's not intimidating, and you just start to talk about stories, and then and things will start to pop up. Oh, my cousin so and so, and oh, my grandfather, and oh, my neighbor, and all this other stuff, and it'll come out in a tape recording. And then rather than try to remember it or scratch down notes, taping it is very, very, very effective. Because if I hadn't taped Aunt Sarah 9 years ago, I wouldn't have all the cute little stories she told me, and some of them are pretty interesting, but I have it all on tape.
Yeah, well, it's another thing that I have found too, that if I say where I am from, people say, "Oh, I know that place. Do you know so and so?" And sometimes it comes down to the point where what they're asking, if you know that person, it's somebody that is a relative of yours.
Exactly. I'll tell you a fast story. Just at church last week, there was some people from another church in with us for the service that day, and I was downstairs at Fellowship Hall, and the fellow came up and he says, "Well, you know," he says, very proud, he says, "my ancestors go back to the Fortune, which came over in 1621. I said, "How about that?" I said, "So did my ancestors." I said, "Maybe we're cousins. What was your ancestor's name?" And he told me, and I said, "Sure." I said, "We're cousins."
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
now that's almost 400 years ago.
Oh, I know.
And here this guy and I are standing there talking to each other over at First Church, and we're related. Many times removed, obviously, but it's just
Also, I
curious how that
noticed
happens.
that if you send to a town, they've had a fire and they've lost a lot of the records. I know my father-in-law came from Maine, and when I contacted the town up there, they wrote back and said they were sorry, but the town hall had been destroyed in a fire at such and such a time. So all his records are kind of lost up there, but I might be able to find them if I'm working somewhere else.
If there's a state archive that, in Massachusetts, the towns and cities have to send duplicates to state archives. So if there's a disastrous event in the town hall or a city hall,
Now, is there
may be a chance
you
that
would
the
send
state have it.
you would contact the city hall? Is that
Well,
just-
you can, I'm mostly successful if it's something that's within driving range to actually go to those
yeah.
town halls or city halls and speak to the town clerk or the city clerk. They are public records, and there are some privacy laws that you have to deal with. Birth records you can't get unless they're 90 years old or over, and certain other restrictions, but
All right, now if someone out there wants to ask you questions or get in touch with you, now how will they get in touch with you?
Well, the neatest thing to do, I suppose, would be just to call. And my local number, it's 241-6411, and that number will actually ring my laptop. And if I'm not right there, it'll forward to my cell phone.
really?
So that's the number you called today, 241-6411. Or they can just visit the website.
No, I call 233-4866.
All right, that's not the number. No, that's not the number that I would that they should use for genealogy purposes.
Okay.
But 241-6411, or they could go to my website, which is oldbones.co. Oldbones.co, and it's not .com. I didn't make a mistake. It's oldbones.co, and I keep current events up there. I'll be up at the Look Park in August at a Civil War battle reenactment with representing Old Bones. I mean, that's Old Bones is just me
that
anyway. But and then there'll be a program at the Palmer Public Library. There'll be a program again at the First Church of Ludlow, which is the fundraiser that we are running, and Ludlow Senior Center. I'll be doing some things with the Ludlow Senior
Sounds like
Center.
he's going to be a busy man.
Yeah.
Now, is there anything else that you want to tell people? I've got the list of the questionnaire that you sent us.
Oh, it's sent to the class? Sure.
And you gave it to everybody one, and you want to know that if you already know this stuff, to jot it down so that you have it, so that you're not going to lose it.
Right. The important thing is
I should say that several times today.
the name of the individual,
Yeah.
and if possible, the year that they were born and the city or town where they were born, and perhaps the date of death in the city and town where
And
they
it does
died.
say marriage too. Yeah.
Yeah, marriage. I don't know too many people that knew when their grandparents or great-grandparents were married, but if you know it, that helps. Yeah, the more the merrier.
And then you do on both sides, your father and your mother, so that you can put them together. And if they came from Europe, when did they come? If you know,
Correct.
And that's a good point because you can get some information from Ellis Island.
If they came through Ellis Island.
Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly a lot of people believe, that brings up an interesting point. Let me say this about Ellis Island and any other ports of entry. Many people believe that their family's name was changed by the clerk who didn't know how to spell. That is profoundly false, and I'll tell you why. the ship's manifests were written in the port of departure. So when you got on the boat in Europe, all right, the family spelled their name to the portmaster, or
Yeah.
whatever they call them, and those lists were created in Europe. That list came on board ship with the passengers and came to Ellis Island or whatever other port of entry. So the changing of the name in Ellis Island is not really true. It may have happened. You may find a few instances and prove me wrong, but by and large, let me say this about changing a name. For example, if you were Jewish in the 1930s and you were escaping Nazism, you may have changed your name before you got on the ship, and that's how, I don't know, Eckstein might have become Brown or whatever. So those kinds of things may
Maybe
have
that's
happened
how Brooks
intentionally.
Bach became Brooks.
Might very well be. Might very well be. But Ellis, and by the way, Ellis Island, they employed thousands of people who spoke the native languages of the people who were immigrating. So there should not have been a language barrier, and there probably wasn't in 99.9% of the cases. But it isn't just Ellis Island. There's ports of entry all over the East Coast.
Okay. Well, now let's see if I can think of anything else. You've got to be sure to have I found that looking up things for this class that we're having, that I had a paper here and a paper there and a paper there. So I'm trying to consolidate all these papers into one person in a pile. And it's interesting to see when you compare the papers, there are different discrepancies in it.
Absolutely.
That you think that you've got it right, and then you go look at this one, and, oh, that one says that. That one. Like my mother's birth. I've got her birth date. I've got her marriage date. I've got the age when she was married. I've got the day that she was died, and you add them all up, and they're not right.
Well,
they're all wrong.
Birth, marriage, and death records are called vital records, and those are probably 99.9% accurate. But when it comes to a census record, and by the way, that's the 1920 census. If I could look at that for a second, and just let people know that this is just about 1/5 of the page.
Oh, yeah.
The page goes way across like that, and it lists up through 1930.
Well, that just
it listed,
happens to be in one town.
Yep, I understand, but it goes down 50 people. But understand how these were generated. An enumerator walked around town, and they came to a place, and they asked questions about everyone in the family. Now, if the husband was an immigrant, and the enumerator asked the wife, "What year did your husband immigrate?" "Oh, I think it was, I don't know, maybe 1888." She could have been wrong. She could have been wrong. Could have been 1885 or 1891. They could have made mistakes by 1, 2, or 3 years. So what you read on the census record is not necessarily gospel, but it can be a guide to when that person immigrated. Same would be true of ages and dates of birth, etc.
Okay, now, are there any places that, except you, where they can get information about their ancestors?
Yes, the Mormons run an incredibly detailed website. It's called FamilySearch.org. Much of what's there is free, and you can find data on your family and transcripts of documents. But if you want to see the actual document, it's not always available at Family Search. They'll give you a link to it, and very often that link takes you to a subscription site, and you got to buy the subscription to look at the document. So that could be a roadblock. But FamilySearch.org, that's one word, FamilySearch.org, is a very comprehensive website, and there's mountains and mountains and mountains of data there.
Well, I've got Ancestry.
Ancestry.com is probably the next most comprehensive
Now,
site.
do you have to pay for that?
They, from time to time, they have free services for 7 days or 14 days, and I've belonged to that, subscribed to it for 10 or 12 years, so I'm not quite sure what their latest offers are, but I use Ancestry.com quite a bit, and I use FamilySearch.org quite a bit. I'll give you a third and there are hundreds of websites. We don't have time to list them all, obviously, but there's a website called Mocavo.com, MOCAVO.com, and that's kind of a clearinghouse for all the other websites, and they'll tell you if you've got a hit, and what website has the information that you're looking for. Mocavo.com, relatively new, but they have lots and lots of information.
And of course,
there.
if anyone knows where their parents or person lived, there's may be able to contact those towns.
Those town halls or the city
Yeah,
halls. Yeah. Some of them will charge.
I knew
and,
that-
And you have to pay for a certified
Yeah,
copy of a
yes,
record.
well, that was when I found that my mother was buried in New York with her sister and that family. And it's surprising how that name, Morin, it was that name that came up, and there was a long list of names, and they were all Morin, 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 and she was tucked in there. But the cemetery said they would send me the list, but I had to pay them X number of dollars to get it.
Exactly, yeah.
And I felt that it was worth the money
Sure.
to get it because I wanted to find out.
Yeah, and did they send it to you?
Yes,
Yeah?
oh yes.
Good, very
It
good.
was a nice, it listed all the names, how old they were, and when they died. And I think it might have said something the country that they were, I'm not sure.
It may have, because the country they're from is usually on the
Yeah.
death record. It's on the death certificate.
Yeah, but it's very...
Look around your house, too. I mean, you'd be surprised the things that you can find around your house. And just to give you two quick examples, this is a book that my great-grandfather got when he married my great-grandmother. And if you can see, they hardly opened it. They hardly used it. You can tell the
Yeah.
pages aren't worn. The gold edges are still on here. And it was presented to them on the event of their marriage in 1869.
Oh, my God.
1869. But the humorous part here is that in as much as it hasn't been used very much, the title of this book is Advice to a Married Couple. So they didn't but they stayed married for about 60 years, so having it work. And this is a diary that my grandfather kept. He worked on the Grand Trunk Pacific Railroad in Northwest Canada.
These are the things that
Yeah.
people say, oh, I don't want that anymore.
Yeah, and
but
I'm
when you come
just-
right down to it,
I
they're
can't, I
valuable.
can't believe that I have this. It'll be 100 years old next year. It was written in 1913. There's an entry for every single day. It is crushingly boring. Okay, but at the same time it's interesting because it talks about. I mean, I get nervous when I lose the remote control for the television, and in here we got up at 4:30 in the morning and went out and chopped wood so that we could cook our breakfast. I mean, that's so far removed from having the remote to change the channel. It's ridiculous.
Oh,
And then
I found that I sent to the New York newspaper to find out about my uncle who was on the police force, and he was a private detective, and he came home one day and hung his gun on the chair. He went and took a shower. When he came out of the shower, the gun went boom, and that was it. I wanted to find out more details, and the newspaper said they were sorry, but those records were gone. They didn't have
that's
them.
too bad. Yeah.
So, and that was in 1925, I think, or something.
Well, there might be a newspaper article that we could look for you.
Yeah,
Yeah. I have these, just speaking of newspaper articles, I've had these cufflinks since I was a kid. They were my grandfather's. They're gold cufflinks with his initial on it. And these cufflinks, and I wore them at our wedding. When Karen and I got married, I wore these cufflinks at our wedding. And then a couple of months ago, I discovered this article in the newspaper. Apparently my grandparents, before they were married, they stood up for friends of theirs, the Beatrice Rood. Now Rood, R-O-D, that's a Ludlow family. And in this article from 1918, it says, the bride wore a suit of blah, 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 and then the bride's gift to the bridesmaid and the gold monogram cufflinks were given to the best man.
Oh, for
There they
goodness
are.
sakes.
So these are almost 100 years old, and I've got them.
So you see, people, it pays to keep things. People say, oh, you keep all that junk. What do you want it for? But I hope that you've gotten some information today. And I hope that if you feel that you want to contact Dave, that you go ahead. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. And I don't know if there's anything else do you think of anything that you didn't tell him?
Oh, we'd be here for a
Oh,
couple,
well.
3 days. No, but that's all right. But let me just repeat the phone number is 413
Okay.
241 6411. And the web address is oldbones.co.
And your name.
Dave Robison.
Spell it.
R-O-B-I-S-O-N.
Okay. I hope you enjoyed it. And And if I can find something else of interest to bring to you, I will. But I thought this would be something that everybody would enjoy. And thank you very much for watching us. Bye.